Pastor Plek's podcast. I'm your host, Pastor Plek, and joining me in studio is none other than Machine Gun Nick. Welcome back, Machine Gun.
Howdy, folks.
And then also in studio with me is Adrian Plekenpool, my sweet wife.
I'm really not.
Who's a great pastor's wife. Pretty much
best.
like every other pastor's wife. Who says they're not like every other pastor's wife. That's kind of like the standard protocol of every pastor's wife. They say they're not like every other pastor's wife.
Mm.
Yeah.
I don't say that actually about myself.
That's good.
Yeah.
All right, and we're talking Exodus, and this past week we took a look at leadership in the framework of the community of God's people, where leaders are called to look out for the marginalized, execute justice on the wicked, and provide the fabric of society for the community. And one of the things that I talked about is that in the military, and Machine Gun Nick is here specifically for this, and I'm assuming you were told this, but in the military, a leader is responsible for everything a unit does or fails to do. Was that kind of common?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so we were told that, at least I was told that, all the way from being 18 at West Point to being at the 82nd Airborne Division to being in the 2nd Infantry Division when I was in combat. And that was sort of like the deal. So, in fact, talking about divisions and stuff, Adrian, we had a little discussion about this because it is my birthday, which I'm pretty excited about.
On Friday.
And you were going to get me something really nice.
I was.
And,
I did.
And you sent me you did. Oh, that was sweet.
Mm-hmm.
And you sent me and I showed this to
wife.
Machine Gun Nick. She sent me a picture of she's like, can I get you this patch? And it was half an American flag and half the patch of the 101st Airborne Division.
Squawking chickens.
The Squawking Chickens. And if you're a part of the Squawking Chickens, that's no offense to you. The Soblowski Air Assault School was very cool. I got to be a part of that. Awesome. However, it is not the 82nd Airborne
I would
Division.
like to maybe review what I actually sent in my text to you.
Okay, yeah.
So I took a picture. I was trying to find a cool, Army. I was trying to find an Army Ranger badge.
Yeah.
Tab.
Right.
Patch? Velcro
Tab.
patch.
Ranger
Tactical Velcro patch for something that I purchased. And I was struggling with a lot of vocabulary that I wasn't privy to. And I came across this one that had half of a flag and half of a cool masculine looking thing. And I thought, well, maybe this works. And it pulled up when I pulled up Ranger. So I figured surely it's going to work. Oh, well, guess what? So I texted him a picture knowing I knew there'd be a problem with it. So I like to give myself credit. And I said, okay, would this be too off for you? If I got it for something, is this when your perfectionist is going to come out? Because I was thinking the stitching was going to be too crooked on this flag, or you'd have some visceral reaction to how horribly the font was slightly off. But oh no, it was the fact that there was
that's exactly
and it even
right
says it's a half patch it says Ranger Airborne, which are two things that you were.
That's right.
And then there is an eagle. An eagle looked cool. I was
the problem is they're not really airborne. They haven't been really airborne since World War II.
So what I learned is this eagle head is not.
Jump? I don't think that's when they were the first.
They were the first to convert over to
choppers. Yeah, they were
they weren't the
air
first.
mobile.
7th Squadron.
Squadron. Do people hear this?
Yeah, how more?
But he didn't have
We once were soldiers. We were soldiers once young. Yeah.
Yeah, but they were something else, and then they got the helicopters first.
Right.
And they became air assault, and then 101st was still airborne in Vietnam.
No.
Yeah.
I don't think they were.
I think they were.
Who was jumping in Vietnam?
What they're discussing, for those of you that don't know, is the symbol.
Yeah, but that's Italy. I mean,
no, the symbol of the eagle head is actually a symbol of an entire people group within the Army.
It is totally another people group.
It's a totally different division from the 82nd Air. The 101st Division.
That's what I learned.
Screaming Eagles. I'll be nice. Is different division than the 82nd Division, All Americans.
All right, yeah, very different. So
what I thought was an icon of something masculine actually represented an entire, as Chris decided to finally inform me, a different team. So within the Army, within Rangers, and within Airborne Rangers, there are in fact different teams that you can be on.
Yeah, and I was not in the Ranger Regiment. I was Ranger qualified, which is distinctly different. But I was in the 82nd Airborne Division as an armor officer, which is sort of wild to think about.
Right.
Because I was a Ranger qualified armor officer in the light cav in the Air Brigade. So I was attached to the entire Air Brigade, which is not airborne. Well, it is airborne, but it was all helicopters.
Right.
And so we were the only ground troop of the helicopter brigade. Might be the best way to put that. Sort of wild.
Okay.
Yeah. Kind of fun.
I mean, in my 20 years in the Army, I was with 10th Mountain Division. I was a 1509er at Geronimo out of Fort Polk, Louisiana. I was then they put me in recruiting duty. We won't really get into that. Then I went to the 82nd Airborne. Amazing group of people.
Yeah, it was great.
And then it all ended at First ID.
Yeah.
So my last field job, I wasn't even in an infantry unit. I was in a cavalry unit.
Yeah.
Which was crazy.
The cavalry unit is the best. You've got all the combined arms right there. It's so great. Okay. Anyway, the whole point of that.
And everything's represented by an animal, just like a mascot.
It is just like a mascot.
And it's all camouflage, and it all has the same words that are in English, but different symbols that signify dramatically different groups of people.
The whole point of that, though, was that a leader a leader's responsible for everything that a unit does or fails to do.
Yeah.
And that's what I was taught in the military. But then also, that's what I now teach to families. Like whenever I marry a couple, I'll say like, hey, husband, you are now responsible for everything that your unit does or fails to do, which sort of takes a huge load off the wife and puts a huge amount of pressure on the husband, as I guess it should be. And I feel that in our marriage, like I feel like responsible. So like when you're wanting to buy new dogs and stuff, I'm like, oh gosh, I don't know if that's the best move. And I feel responsible for that, which is why I might give you some pushback when you want to buy a new dog.
That's great, yeah.
Yeah. So are you going to buy the new dog?
I haven't decided yet.
Yeah. All right. So we've been talking about that. And now when we got into the message, though, we talked about how Exodus 22:28 says, you shall not revile God nor curse a ruler of your people. And what I did is I said that those two things are linked because cursing a ruler of the people is like cursing God because you are questioning who God has put in charge. Now, Here's sometimes it's really hard, and maybe you could speak to this. Do you find it hard to believe or hard to accept that all leadership is God ordained?
Oh yeah, definitely.
Tell me why that it gives you pause.
So currently, I'm gonna have to grasp with the concept of, I mean, there was some military leaders that you're just like, how did you get here?
Right.
And then, I mean, currently, I think there's a huge group of people on the right-hand side of politics that are like, are you serious?
Right.
Me being one of them, that Joe Biden, I'm not really sure if he knows his name today, definitely calls out, foreign leaders that were 20 years ago. And you're like, no, that guy is definitely not in charge of that country anymore. Like, I don't remember the last time he was. And God ordained this to happen to us.
Right, and I think that is true. That even, Corey Jean-Pierre actually said that he's completely fine, and anyone who doesn't agree with that has lost their objectivity in news reporting. But if you look at Joe Biden and you're like, I don't know if I can trust you, you have to trust that God is in control of Joe Biden. Like that's the part that is difficult. And that's why we don't revile, we don't curse Joe Biden. We pray for Joe Biden, and I think that's the challenge that I think people have is they tend to curse the ruler. Like if you're looking on social media right now, people like mocking Joe Biden and just open like verbal warfare on him. And whatever your politics, you just go like even Jon Stewart, like let him have it, and he's pretty on the Joe Biden camp side of things, and he is sort of mocking him in a really outspoken kind of way. So I think there is just a culture, right and left, that just sort of curses the rule of your people. And when you do that, I think there's a link that God's wanting to say, like, don't do that because you are then not trusting the leadership that God has ordained to be there. And what you could be doing is praying for them and then asking God to do something greater. And then also it puts you in the judgment seat when you don't know what's going on. I think a lot of times, like for example, when Afghanistan happened with Joe Biden, and he pulled out all the troops, and it was like a complete and utter disaster. When people would ask me about that, I would go, like, don't you have contempt or, like, frustration with Joe Biden. I said, I want to be honest with that. I don't know what information Joe Biden was privy to, or all the leaders that got in the Oval Office, or whoever was the decision maker at that point, who said this is a good idea based upon the information they had at the time. I'm not going to go in there and say, like, you screwed that up, because I wasn't there. And it looks like such an obvious thing, all right, when you look at that and you go, like, you are complete, like, vacant,
Common
empty suit.
sense says that we blow up the equipment if we're not going to take
Sure.
it with us.
Could it,
Destroy
was
it all.
that, this is where you go, was that Joe Biden's fault? I don't know. Did he say, like, don't do that? Or was that some general or some,
But
you
what
know,
about the
colonel?
leader fails to do?
Right, sure. Everything that the leader does or fails to do, I granted. But
I mean, everything that the unit, the division, the theater commander fails to do or achieves
Right.
falls on them, right?
Right.
So if they did a great job, hey, good job. But
Right.
they didn't. They did a horrible
Sure.
job.
They should have blown up the equipment. There's no reason the Afghanis should have tanks, have Bradleys,
Let's put it
have armored fighting vehicles.
Not the Afghanis, the Taliban.
Right. The Taliban.
Who then turned those instruments on those people that helped us, and we didn't even get them out. We just were throwing people in planes.
It reminded me of 1975 of evacuating Vietnam. And it was just a disaster.
And maybe that's a problem with having older people in as leaders, because that's exactly what it looked like.
Yeah.
And
So, but to be fair, again, I don't know what was going on in those meetings. I don't know, like, hey, we need to get them out now. Like, why the urgent rush? There could have been something that we did not know. And so I hesitate to curse the ruler of my people because of that. Now, fun fact, and I know, Adrian, you're probably, like, thrilled with this. Did you know that the King James Version translates God right here as judges? Did you guys know that?
no.
So you shall not revile judges nor curse a ruler of your people is how it's translated, King James and other translations. And it's not because the word is wrong. It's the word is interpreted differently. So the word is Elohim. If you're not familiar with what Elohim is plural judges or singular God. Or the God. It could be the gods, because it could also be interpreted as, like, pagan gods. So so all the judges back then were called Elohim, which is sort of a wild thing. Anyway, because they would make judgments on human issues. Anyway, so this could be interpreted, you shall not revile judges nor curse or ruler your people. It doesn't really matter how you interpret it, because ultimately it says don't curse God. And here it says don't curse the magistrates or the judges, the leadership, nor curse or ruler your people. So either way, that works. And then we connected worship with taking care of the judges or taking care of the rulers of the people, because whenever you worship God, you take and you offer wheat, or you'd offer wine, or you'd offer sheep. And who would eat the sheep and the wine and all that? It would be the leadership that was the tribe of Levi that didn't have an agrarian inheritance. They weren't given a geographical land to take on, but rather were dispersed throughout all the other tribes to be the leadership judges and clerks and help out with ruling the country. So that's kind of an interesting sort of tidbit, that God would interlink the leadership, and they'd have to trust God for their food by trusting the people, and then the people would have to trust God by trusting the leadership that was put in place to help settle civil disputes. Mm-hmm. All right. Any other thoughts there on those kind of things?
Oh, I think that's good.
Yeah. So the other part that we looked at was this was fun. Remember how Jesus said, and I brought this up later, you've heard it said that you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I said you love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. When I look at that verse, and I tie this into Exodus 23, specifically verse 4, if you meet your enemy's ox or his donkey going astray, you shall bring it back to him. I think a lot of times people say, like, hey, you've got to unhitch the Old Testament from the New, and Jesus is completely a different guy and almost a different God than the Old Testament. But all Jesus was doing was expounding upon Old Testament themes. So, Adrian, have you ever had your enemy's ox or donkey go astray near you? Or how about your enemy's dog?
You know, I've definitely had my enemies, people that aren't my favorite people.
Yeah.
Would that be enemies?
Sure. I mean, like, people that you have a little bit of a rift with.
Yeah. Have I had them reach a point where they were in need? Yes.
And then did you meet the need or just go?
Oh, both. I think I've done both. But I think that what I've experienced is, well, I'm trying to think of one example, but I know that in some of these situations, it's easier when you have young kids and you have a bunch of moms, because it's very common that you would have a rift, like a minor rift with another mom. Like you would have a disagreement on parenting style.
Is that a thing? Like when you talk about like young moms, are they? I don't want to say competing is the right word.
Yes, well, they are. It's a natural thing. It's like you're new at being a mom, and you're full of hope, but
And
also
judgment.
fear. Right.
Okay,
and so like, cause you want your kids to turn out, you want to do a good job. And so there's a lot
Is
of
the fear that your kids are going to be screwed up? Is the fear that you are going to have a hard life? What's the fear?
I think for every person, it's slightly different.
Okay.
And so I think for me, it was like, I'm afraid that my kids might not turn out to be like confident, independent, successful people. Like that's my fear. But I think for a lot of moms, it's like a fear that they might not look like they're doing a good job,
Or
it's
like they care enough.
Yeah, or it's a fear that their kids might not perform academically or athletically or fit in. Like there's like a lot of moms who have a huge fear of their kid not fitting in. And so I think every mom has a different fear, but I think generally speaking, young moms have more fears and either a false sense of confidence or a false sense of of control.
Right.
And I think that can create rifts very quickly in friendships, because you find it almost threatening if somebody is either overconfident or overcritical.
Right.
Either they're overconfident in themselves or they're overcritical of you or maybe a style that you like. And that's very
parenting style.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. I think that can feel very threatening. And something happens after you've been a mom for 10 years. It's like you
Graduate.
It's like I don't know what it is. It's like you've been humbled. Like a lot of your things didn't work like you thought they would.
Yeah.
You've seen some of your friends' techniques like fail them also. And then you've also just like, it's almost like you reach this point. I was watching this reel the other day about how if you have more than 3 children, you've reached this point of zen, and like there's no noise that can come from the other room that like alarms you.
Right.
And I'm like, that's very accurate in our home.
Yeah. I mean, when Austin drilled his face on that.
We both rolled our eyes and said, you better not have broken something.
Right.
And we did not care. And
Right.
then his mouth was bleeding out. So this is where I do think that's like, you do expect that the kids are always fine. And like, even the kids are jumping off the loft beds. I mean, it's
Our loft beds?
when they have
jumping-
friends over.
They're jumping off them?
Yeah, they are.
Like from the top?
From the top.
That's like a
Nobody's
good
broken
solid
a leg
5.5
yet.
feet.
Yeah, it is.
And if
No,
you go
and-
over the thing, that's like 6 feet.
And you didn't know. So that's what I mean, okay?
Yeah.
So there's something that happens when you've been a parent for longer, you have more children, and it's like, okay, there's just some things that don't matter, and you've kind of like seasoned your way out of some of the fear and competitions. Like I still have fears, I still have concerns, but like when I see another mom doing it differently, I'm like, her way might work better
Right.
than mine.
Right.
And like you kind of own. It's almost like what people say happens in your 40s. It's like you own your weaknesses and you're comfortable a little bit more in them, and you kind of just know who you are.
Right.
And like that happens as a mom, I think. And so you become less threatened. So anyway, early in those years of being a young mom, there is some kind of threatened feelings, especially if someone even just has opinions about whether you stay at home, whether you work. Like I couldn't give 2 craps right now if somebody has an opinion about how I spend my time. Like
Right.
I could not care less.
But there are, I think, new moms totally.
Oh,
do.
you're very sensitive to that, very highly sensitive to that. And so anyway, I just think that is normal.
So what you're talking about is frenemies. Let's just
Yes.
yeah, those are the frenemies. But I do think
But
it's
in
still
a church community, they're not necessarily friends. They can be people that are just acquaintances.
well. And to be fair, this is when God's talking to the nation of Israel. These are people supposed to be relatives, right? So this is exactly frenemies that we're
Yes.
talking about. It's like someone who might do you wrong, in a sense, but they're not like literally trying to hurt you. They just want to get ahead of you.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. So or they're just afraid, and so they're coming at you instead of like addressing their fear. Regardless, I think that sometimes there was tensions in those people. And what I always found is anytime I would have a friend where I would feel a little bit of tension or rift that was like temporary, all it would take is to go be there for them.
Yeah.
In a time of need, even if it was a very minor one. And it bonded us. And then it was like we capitalized on all of this history that we had that we were kind of willing to just throw away in 1 second over the tiff or the argument or the awkwardness. It was like the second that either they were able to be there for me or I was able to be there for them in a time of like mild or moderate need. It was like all of a sudden we feel bonded, and then we feel the blessing of all this time investment.
Do you feel comfortable telling that story about Megan? And I'm not sure if you do, but like the one, well, I don't want to get into it, but like, do you know what I'm talking about? Where like you felt like a real emotional sense toward her, and then you had to call her and be like, hey, I've been feeling these things.
Oh, like jealousy?
Yeah.
Oh, Megan DeZalo.
Yeah.
Yeah, that'd be fun.
Yeah. All
I
right,
haven't talked about that in a long time. First of all, who made the sticker on your microphone that says Plek?
That would be Cody Sparks Band.
Hey, Plek and Pull is spelled Plek, just for the record. Okay.
I did cross that C out on my pack over there.
Okay, so back when I'd had my second son, Jet, Megan and I were friends, and
Megan is Grayson's Pastor Officer Grayson's wife, who's been at the church really since before we were
here. And I had known Megan forever, and
you knew her in high school, or
I had known her in high school when she was in middle school. Actually, I was in high school, but yes, and so we'd had her. So I'd had one baby, and like gotten back to my pre-baby weight after him, which felt like
a monumental achievement.
Like, honestly, there was nothing I could have desired more in my life than that. Nothing. Okay, that's the level of like vanity and idolatry that I have. I still have, frankly. To be honest. Okay, so I finally achieved it, but it took me a year. It took me like 12 full months, and at the end of the 12 full months, the weight didn't look quite the same.
Right.
Like when in pictures, I'd be like, I'm at the same weight, but like this dispersed a little. I'm sure it was because I was lacking some muscle. And so therefore it was not quite the same. And so I was never like feeling super good about myself, but feeling good enough.
Yeah.
And then I got pregnant with our second son, and I had just had him, and my friend Megan had a massive infant, like twice the size of mine in utero. And she had him, and like she left in her like 00 jeans from the hospital. Okay. She was one of those. There's not very many of those, but she's one of them. And she comes in them because she's able to just put a little hair tie. And she was always like, I don't know why people buy maternity clothes. You just need a hair tie. And I was like, oh, some of us are putting on weight everywhere. And so a hair tie is not going to cut it. Anyway, so she leaves in them, and she'd had her son, I think, in November, and I had mine in January. And she's already, like in January, not only has she left the hospital, probably less weight than she started the pregnancy, but she's like completely snapped back enough to where like maybe looks better than before she was ever pregnant with children. Yeah. And I'm over here, and I'm like, it's going to be a year, and I'm mad, and I am, not happy about this. Pretty jealous of the fact that somebody can like not have to spend this year. And I have fear that, again, I swear that's always the driver, but fear that that it's not gonna happen for me the same way. But also jealousy over the fact that like
she had no effort.
Or her effort. No, I actually thought she spent a lot of effort. I actually thought that. I think I was wrong in assuming that, although I'm still not convinced to this day. But she and I talk about this rather frequently. But anyway, I was like, she just learned how to starve to death and like be happy about it. And I'm like, how can I become like that? I thought that was what she learned. Okay, so I was angry. I was like very angry and jealous. And finally one day I was like, I was going through this book on comparison that was like touching on several areas. Sandra Stanley, yeah. She has a book called Comparison Trap. And it was a great little workbook. And it helped me tackle like a lot of the comparison issues that I was having in kind of a young mom stage of life. Yeah. And
you're still a young mom.
Well, not really. I have a bunch of like kids that go poop in the toilet. That's a really big deal.
Actually, that's a good deal.
Yeah. So they don't pee yet always there, but that'll never happen. Yeah. So anyway, so I was comparing parenting styles. I was comparing my house. I was comparing my, like everything. There's not one area that you feel confident, that I felt confident about at that time. And so I was going through this book, and it comes across like if there's an individual specifically that you are struggling with, then you probably need to go like love this person or serve this person or even tell them. Right. And I was like, oh heck no, I'm not doing that. And so for like 3 days, I had just avoided that page because I was like, I can't fill it out. I can't like mentally admit that I have to do this.
Because it was a workbook where you went through it and said like, who's the person? And you're like,
yes, I can't write it down. Like I can't write it down. I can't admit this. But after about 3 days of fighting it, I was like, okay, there's Megan and I weren't as close friends at the time as I wished we were. And I always felt like part of it is my issue of
Right.
like, I kind of hate her a little bit. And so I was like, I think that could prevent us. And she had so many things in a friend that I knew I needed and
Like what?
wanted, and like just a lot of things. And the fact that they were at the church on staff, like there was no reason for us not to be much
Super close.
closer friends. Right. And so I was like, this is silly. Like, what if my sin in this
Well, I
area?
think her parenting style is one of the things you always told me was like very similar.
Yes, we did have similar parenting styles, and we just had like, I don't know what it was. I felt very sure that I needed that her and I being close friends was the right move, and my sin was possibly preventing that. And I thought, well, that would sure stink if I was single-handedly able to like prevent this entire relationship because of my like petty, vain jealousy over this, right?
So how'd you remedy?
So I didn't know what to do. So I was like, it's way too awkward. Like, I for sure am never calling somebody, A. And B, I don't really know how I was going to have an in-person conversation. So I just texted. And I was like, at this point, I was kind of like, I felt like I needed to be obedient to God.
You felt a lot of conviction. Like
I did.
Yeah.
Genuine conviction. So I was like, this is obedience to God at this point, and God can handle my text.
Right.
Like, he's big enough to handle a text right now, even though the book says to call. Okay, that's fine. So I
Give what it can give.
send a text, and I'm like, hey, I just am going through. She knew I was going through the book, and I tell her, and I just was like, I just am so jealous at the fact that you walk out of the hospital in your 00 jeans and just seem to like live your life happy and disciplined, and it just I
Works
feel
for
like
you.
if I tell you that, maybe I'll be set free from how pissed I am at the reality of it. And of how poor thing she had to receive that text. Like,
Right.
that
I mean,
sucked.
I think,
how awkward to
yeah,
receive
like,
that.
I think there's
So
two
she-
sides to that. Like,
Yeah.
when you like, hey, you're actually my enemy, and she's like, what?
I know I'm not the first person to probably like give her a hard time for that reality.
Right.
And so like that stunk for her to have to receive that. And I felt that, which is partially why I hadn't ever sent it. But I'd reached this point where I was like, I really feel like this is the right thing to do. Like, surely it will work
And
out.
did you guys ever talk about it, or did you just like leave it on text?
I think we've like we referenced it. I talked about it at a women's retreat I did like the next fall.
Yeah.
So, but she received it well. Like, she responded well in a way that was like, she's like, oh, you never know the whole picture. Kind of like admitting
Yeah.
that there was more factors to this. And she's right. She was right. And like, that was a super humble way of like owning that.
That's good.
And it was great. And it completely, like, from then on, it was like a huge block was lifted between her and I. And she, to this day, is like
Your
my
closest,
closest friend.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I love that from a frenemy standpoint. How about you, Machine Gun Nick, from an enemy standpoint?
I killed 3 Afghan donkeys in one day with my truck.
How did that feel?
Oh, well, after the third one, the driver was like, sorry, Jonah, I'm not doing that again. I'm like, all right. And
But
every
let's-
time we killed one, we had to like stop and pay for it. And I was getting pissed.
It was Afghan donkeys. I don't know if the donkey part came out very loud or clear.
Donkey.
Yeah.
Donkey. It was an Afghan. So they used donkeys in Afghanistan to move seeds and stuff. I remember this quite frankly because the first one we had to stop. They're like, I forget my call. Oh, my call sign was 2-2. They're like,
Which means
2-2.
second like squad,
Second platoon, second squad. Later, they're like 2-2 hit a donkey, and we gotta stop. And I'm like, why do we gotta stop? Who cares, right? This
You
is
were
a
a very
conversation.
hard human being back
This
then.
is yes. This is on the net. I'm like, I don't care. We hit a donkey.
The net's the radio.
He should have got the radio. He should have got his donkey. Like they were weaving the donkeys in and out of traffic.
How fast were you going?
Well, it was one of those not real fast.
But enough to run it over?
I just said, just keep going.
So you knocked out 3 of them?
Yeah, in a row. I think what happened was after I hit the first one, he got on the on his phone, called his donkey handling friends up, and we're like, hey, they're paying if you get your donkey ran over. Like, so let's put some more on the road. Because we'd have to stop. There'd be like seeds.
All right,
all
so
over the
can we
place.
go to a story about where you had to overcome your enemy had something against you and you responded with hate your enemy or love your neighbor or love your enemy? Did you ever respond with love your enemy, or did you have an opportunity to do so?
I didn't grasp that concept really until quite a little while ago. So no, I mean, there was the neighbor who aimed a weapon at me.
Yeah, and you did not kill them.
Well, we did not kill them, but we did. There was 4 other neighbors one night, all of us with pistols, because he was acting really weird. He would like go in the corners and stuff, and like be like videotaping me or something. And it all came to a head one night when me. A guy who was staying with me and 2 other neighbors were on my property with pistols, walking towards him to make sure that nothing happened. And then the cops came out, and like I that night, had he pulled his phone up like a gun, I was going to end it.
Right.
But I didn't.
That was really good.
There was restraint.
That was well done.
I didn't firebomb his house. That was another concept that was rolling around.
Is he still your neighbor?
No, he's moved to Florida, thank the Lord.
Okay. All right. Well, that's good. That's good.
Yeah, because that really, I'm not sure if I got PTSD or not, but there might be something there, because after that, I was walking around my house in full body armor,
Yeah, okay. Oh, how about at Walmart? Did you ever have any incidents?
Oh, boy. So the Walmart incident, I didn't even think of this. So I was in Walmart as a manager over the tires and oil area, and the Taliban walked in one day.
Wait, when you say the Taliban walked in, you're talking about Round Rock, Texas. You're
Yes.
working at Walmart,
Yes.
and the Taliban walks in.
Yes.
Explain that.
Okay, well, so, all right, maybe he wasn't Taliban, but we will go with this, all right?
You felt he looked Taliban.
Not all Pashtun are Taliban, but all Taliban are Pashtun.
Okay. Pashtun is
Pashtun is a
language.
a language in Afghanistan.
Dialect.
Right? And they're more prone to, do hostilities, act as terrorists or mafia threat. And I mean, I've lost a few brothers to them.
Yeah.
So I'm in there. This guy's he comes in, he doesn't speak Spanish, so my Spanish speaking guy can't understand him. And he's talking and I heard it, and I was like, oh. And I go to him, I'm like, are you Dari or are you Pashtun? He said Pashtun. And I went from everyday ordinary calm, like I thought I had my stuff together, to I shot up to freaking we were ready to go to war right then and there.
At Walmart.
At Walmart. I was about to see red.
You were about to be a Walmart meme.
Yes. There was going to be it wasn't going to be going postal anymore. It was going to be go Walmart.
Right.
And he's in there trying to tell me how he's going to get his tire worked on for free, because that's how it used to be in his country. And I'm over here, it doesn't work like that. But the whole time, like, my adrenaline's pumping more. And, you can't carry a gun as a Walmart employee, but I was still ready. Like, I spray paint him in the face. I didn't know what it was going to take, but he was going to end up somewhere, not in a good spot. It came to a head when two team leads, and I'm a full on, like, they call them coaches now, but I was a manager, right? 2 team leads, 2 people below me come in there and they're like, Nick, you got to leave your area right now, or you're going to get yourself fired. Like, I'm like, all right, I'll walk out. I'm going to walk out, but he's paying, I think I might have been, by this time, openly cursing.
Right.
And so I walk out, and I
doubt
go, and it's about half an hour, maybe an hour, me just walking back and forth behind my shop, like, trying to calm myself down, trying to, like, grasp that I have a problem now, because I thought our life was peachy. This wasn't going to happen to me. Like,
Right.
I'm good. I'm not going
Right.
to go to jail.
Right.
No, I was ready to go to jail.
Right.
And I guess I was triggered, as the word is.
Yeah. So to be fair, I think that's where a lot of us struggle, is that when we come across our enemies, right? I think and it could be your enemy in your house with maybe an ex-wife, or this could be just someone that hurt you, betrayed you, whatever. It does create a lot of angst within. And so when Jesus says, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, that is a wild thought. I think in our Americanese, we can turn it into our frenemies. But the reality that Jesus is talking about, like, literally people who are not looking to do you good. And not even like just passively do you bad, but actively harm you. And so Jesus says something that do something utterly radical, which is love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, which is why this becomes so important into the Exodus law structure, is that the reason why it was said, hey, love your enemies by bringing the donkey or ox back, is that was an active way of not feeling love, but loving through action. And you could only do that if you trusted the leaders who were going to be over your law case, because usually when we're talking about enemies of somebody suing you, somebody taking your property or some sort of issue. And that's exactly what he was getting at. And that's why it feels like this is thrust in here without any context, but it's under a court system where if you have an enemy, the enemy is probably trying to sue you. And that's where Jesus says, hey, if your enemy has something against you, go and make it right with him before you get to the court. Just make it right, or else you're going to end up in jail, probably because you're not thinking this through. All right. We're going to kind of wrap this up. And the other part was they also talked in Exodus, we also talked about not perverting justice to keep the vulnerable behind. And I thought that was sort of an interesting thing. Like in our own culture, there has been a tendency to keeping some people disadvantaged. I remember when I was first learning about the civil rights movement, one of the big advocations of Martin Luther King was that back in the day, whenever land grants were given to Americans to go settle the West, they weren't given to African Americans, and so that put a huge disadvantage generations down, and so that kept people behind. And so that was a real struggle to kind of wrap your head around of like how you can actively keep a certain group of people behind, not letting African Americans kind of buy into power lines or have to live in a certain district where housing and real estate would be worth less. And so that was a real issue that our country had to overcome by implementing spiritually minded laws that advocated for the Imago Dei equal across all people, which is sort of like why it's important to sort of understand like generational wealth passed down from generation to generation. If you're sort of neglected in that sort of wealth distribution on the front end, it's going to really come back on the back end. Anyway, that's how I saw that really kind of coming out. And so one of the huge things for us as Christians is we don't want to pervert justice to keep vulnerable people. Specifically here, it was the migrant, it was the fatherless, it was the widow, and it was the poor that you could keep behind by perverting the justice. Although on the flip side of this, what God also institutes here is don't be partial to the poor just because they're poor, which I thought was sort of a wild thought, because you're like, hey, the rich guy over here has enough money. They could stand to lose a few bucks and help this poor guy. But what happens, you dishonor the Imago Dei, the image of God in that poor person, by advocating on them just because they're poor, and you'll never be able to change your circumstances. Kind of like the victim mentality propagated. So I thought that was sort of fascinating and a neat way for God to sort of bring together his law in Exodus, and then Jesus expounds upon it to really show us how it is completely hitched and linked. So, all right, hey guys, if you got questions, text in at 737-231-0605. We would love to hear from you. We talk faith, culture, everything in between. Thanks so much for listening, especially on this sermon recap. We'd love to hear from you, so make sure you let us know how you're doing. So to kind of wrap this up, from our house to yours, have an awesome week of worship.